Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday, Yom Sheni. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Monday evening? Yehudit in South Carolina. Bella in Florida, Shandor in the Bronx, Bill in mid-Missouri, who is doing his civic duty by attending a city council meeting. God bless you. We should all participate in local politics, which is so important and nobody makes the time. Guy in Ohio, Paul in the Great Northwest, Melissa in Great Neck, Lucy in Minnesota, Chaim in Florida, Marjorie in Georgia, Aoife in Florida, Lucy in Minnesota. Welcome, everybody. I said Melissa in Great Neck, right? Our daf is page 109 here in Tractate Bava Kamma, the 21st volume of the Talmud. Just yesterday, at the end of yesterday's class, we read Mishna number 6 here in chapter 9, and now we're going to proceed to discuss it. So why don't I just reread the Mishnah? I shouldn't read a Mishnah at the end of class, and then, we're going to start with the Gemara on it. Might as well save the Mishnah for when we're discussing it. So Mishnah number 6 said, if the owner asked the Baili, where is my deposit? And the Baili said to him, it was lost. And the owner said, I administer an oath to you. The Baili, the custodian, whether paid or unpaid, said, Amen, therefore accepting the oath, and then witnesses testify about the Baili that he didn't lose it. In fact, he lied and he consumed it himself. Then he must pay the principal. If the Baili admitted on his own that he had taken a false oath, then he must pay the principal and the additional 1/5 and bring a guilt offering. Sounds like it's worse than the one who didn't admit, but the one who did admit has completed his atonement. When he makes restitution, adds the 5th, and brings a guilt offering. The one who, was forced to pay up, his sin is still upon him. If the owner asked the Baili, where is my deposit? And the Baili said to him, it was stolen. And the owner said, I administer an oath to you. And the Baili said, Amen, therefore accepting the oath. And the witnesses testify about the Baili that he stole it. So then he is forced to pay the double payment because he claimed that it was stolen when in fact he took it. So now we've seen this is a particularity in the law. He steps into the role of the thief, the make-believe thief that he claimed had stolen it because he stole it from the actual owner. So he pays the double payment. If he admits before the witnesses come, then he makes restitution, adds the 5th, brings a guilt offering, and he thereby completes his atonement. And the Mishnah continued that in the case of one who robs his father, right? So now how do you make restitution if, for example, the owner is dead and it was your father, right? So if one who robs his father, and the father demands that he return the stolen item, and he takes a note to his father that he did not rob him, and then the father dies, and then the son admits that he robbed his father and took a false oath. So now this necessitates the return of the principal and the giving of the additional 1/5 payment. But to who does he give it? So he gives it to his father's heirs, of which he is either one of several or he is the only one. So then what should he do? If he has brothers, right, he's one of several heirs. So this son pays the principal and the additional 1/5 payment to his father's other sons or his father's brothers. And he brings a guilt offering, and he does not keep his own share of that penalty and that restitution that he made to the estate. It's not that he gives up the whole estate, but whatever he added to the estate through his restitution and the 5th, that he doesn't participate in at the time that the estate is distributed to the inheritors. And if he does not want to forfeit his share, or where he does not have sufficient funds to pay the other heirs while forfeiting his share. So he can borrow money in the amount of the value of the stolen item, and the creditors come and they are repaid in part from his share in the stolen item. And in the case of one who says to his son in a vow, it is forbidden like an offering, meaning I am just basically I am taking a vow that you are prohibited to benefit from my property. The father says to the son, I vow that you will not have any benefit from my property. And for that reason, you may not derive. So and the mechanism of that vow is he makes it like konam to the son, meaning it's as if he consecrated the property, and nobody can benefit from consecrated property. So he's saying that his property is like consecrated property vis-a-vis the son. It's another way of saying he's taken a vow that the son cannot benefit from his property. Then if the father dies, well, the son inherits from him because it is no longer the father's property once he dies. But if the father stated in his vow that his son may not derive benefit from his property in his life and in his death, then even if the father then dies, the son does not inherit from him, as the prohibition is still in effect. In other words, his father disinherited his son. And he used the mechanism of vow that his son would never benefit from the father's property even after the father dies. And instead of taking his inheritance, the son returns his portion to the estate, or he can pass it on to his own sons or to his brothers. And if it does not have sufficient funds to subsist without his inheritance, he borrows money in the amount of the value of his share in the inheritance, and the creditors come and are repaid from his share. Now that is a pretty convenient, use of the law. I would say, I don't know if I'd call it a loophole, but the idea that he could find creditors to lend money to him, and then the creditors could be repaid out of the estate. I mean, he is benefiting, isn't he? Because his loan is being paid off by the estate, even though that money never went to him. So let's see how this works. It's going to be discussed in the Gemara. So here, 109a, near the top, the Gemara on Mishnah number 6 in chapter 9. So with regard to the law written in the Mishnah that one who robs his father pays the principal and the additional 1/5 to the father's heirs, right? This is one who robs, took a false oath, and then admitted it before witnesses came. So about this, Rav Yosef says, one may even put this money in a charity purse if he so chooses. And Rav Papa says, and when giving the money, he must say, this is what was robbed from my father, right? He can't brush it. This is a guy who's trying to make an atonement, right? He admitted it before witnesses came. So he can't brush under the rug that this money that's not going to go to him, and the reason is because he robbed it from his father. So if he's now going to give it to other heirs, or he's even going to give it to charity, presumably in the name of his father, at the time that he gives it, he has to tell the recipient that he's giving away this money because it's the proceeds, it's restitution for what he stole from his father. I'm sure that would be a very difficult, embarrassing thing to do. Don't rob your parents. I mean, don't rob anybody. But when you rob your parents, it's just so much worse. It, violates the 5th commandment in such an egregious way. So there's lots of reasons not to rob your parents. Okay, the Gemara questions the Mishnah's ruling that one who robs his father must return the stolen item to others, even if he is the sole heir. Why must he do this? If he is the sole heir, let him forgive the debt to himself as the heir. To whom payment is due, he should be able to forgive it. Since now he's now the heir and he owes to his father's estate and he's the sole heir of the estate, so why does he have to give this money to someone? There's no one to give it to if he's the sole heir. He could just forgive the debt, he'd be off the hook. And didn't we learn in a Mishnah on page 103a that in the case of a robber who took a false oath claiming to be innocent and he later admitted his liability, if the owner forgave him concerning the principal, but did not forgive him concerning the additional 5th, that he need not pursue him to repay the remaining debt, In other words, he doesn't have to go all the way to another country in order to do it. He could send it. He has to do it. But he doesn't go to pursue him to such great lengths. So apparently, even the principal, and we learn from that the principal is subject to forgiveness. So why doesn't he forgive the obligation to himself? And Rabbi Yochanan said, this is not difficult. That Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, who says that this obligation can be forgiven. While this Mishnah, ruling that a son who robbed his father and is his sole heir, cannot forgive the obligation to himself, this Mishnah that we just read is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Kiva, who holds that this obligation cannot be forgiven. That's why he's going to have to give it away and tell the recipient why. Now, Rabbi Yochanan explains, as it is stated in the Baraisa, in the Tosefta 10:16, that the verse states, with regard to one who steals from one who then died, quote, "But if the man has no kinsman to whom restitution may be made for the guilt, and restitution for guilt that is made," I'm sorry, let me read that again. Quote, "But if the man has no kinsman to whom restitution may be made for the guilt, the restitution for guilt that is made shall be the Lord's, even the priest's." Right? So if you can't make restitution to the one you robbed, and he has no heirs so that you could make restitution to his heirs, okay, then where are you going to give it to? You're going to give it to, the infrastructure. In other words, you're going to give it to the temple. When the temple is standing, you could give it to the temple treasury, and it would go for the upkeep of the temple, to feed the priests there, whatever. You're giving it to the house of the Lord. Now, in the absence of the temple, presumably you would give it to charity. So that's from Numbers 5:8. So the Baraisa asks, but is there any Jewish person who has no kinsman? Since every Jew descends from Jacob, our forefather, Jacob who had his name changed to Israel, so we are all the children of Israel. Since every Jew descends from Jacob, our forefather, all Jews have relatives to inherit from them. So rather, it must be that the verse is speaking of robbery of a convert who never married or had children as a Jew. That's why he doesn't have, and remember that when a person converts to Judaism, he can stay in touch with his family that didn't convert, but under Jewish law, legally speaking, they're not his relatives. They don't inherit from him under Jewish law. Of course, they can inherit from him under secular law, but not under Jewish law, under Torah law. So rather, it must be that the verse is speaking of robbery of a convert who never married or had children as a Jew, and in any case is no longer legally related to his non-Jewish family. So he has no heirs. In this situation, the Torah instructs one who robbed from a person who then died before he could make restitution, who was a convert, that you should return the stolen items to a priest. Now the Baraisa continues, in the case of one who robbed a convert and took a false oath to him saying that he did not rob him, and then he heard that the convert died, and he was bringing his money for the principal and the additional fifth and his guilt offering up to Jerusalem to pay his debt to the priests and sacrifice his offering, and then he encountered the same convert who in fact had not died. And instead of having the robber pay the money right away, the convert established it as a loan for the robber, right? So this is very interesting that they're making it, they're obviously twisting the circumstances, making it a very unusual, hyper unusual situation in order to get at a legal principle, right? So follow the circumstances. He stole money from a convert, right? And then he took an oath that he had not robbed the convert. And then he regretted that he had done this. He felt bad. And he says, I admit it. I stole. I'm going to make restitution plus the fifth and bring my guilt offering. But then he hears that the convert died. So he can't give it to the convert, and the convert left no heirs. So now he's on his way to Jerusalem. This is during a period when the temple is standing. And he's bringing the money for the restitution, the additional fifth, and he's going to bring his offering to sacrifice in the temple. And his plan is to give the principal that he stole plus the fifth to a priest, since he can't give it to the heirs of the convert who died. And as he goes up to Jerusalem, he meets that convert. He's like, I thought you were dead. No, I'm not dead. Oh, now for whatever reason, instead of just giving him the money, the convert is moved, and says, it's great that you're making restitution. Thank you for giving me the money. And the guy says, listen, if I give you this money, I'm going to be flat broke. So the convert says, listen, okay, I had written off this money. You don't have to pay me today. Pay me, in a month, or pay me in 6 months, whatever it is. So now it's as if he paid it back, and the convert is lending him the money, right? So now the restitution has been turned into a loan. And then before he can pay back the loan, the convert actually dies. Okay, so now what happens? So the convert established it as a loan for the robber, and then the convert died, leaving his property ownerless, since the convert has no heirs. That hasn't changed. So now this robber acquires all that is in his possession. He doesn't acquire all the possessions of the convert, but this loan that he was supposed to pay back to the convert, now he has no one to pay it to. So now the question is, since it's been converted into a loan, and if you owe money to someone who leaves no heirs, and then that person dies, okay, so you got off. You got lucky. Now you don't have to pay back the loan. So is this one who was going to make restitution of stolen money plus the fifth to the convert with no heirs, and then it was established as a loan for him, and now the convert is dead, so in the end, he doesn't have to pay it back, or does he? Right? That's what they're asking. So in this situation, he acquires the money that is in his possession, as it is now a loan, not money to pay back to the theft, so he doesn't have to pay it back. This is the statement of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili. But Rabbi Akiva says, no, the robber has no remedy until he will remove his stolen item from his possession. Rabbi Akiva says, no, you have to continue your plan of giving it to the priests or to charity. Give it to charity, right? Or to a priest. In other words, you have to give it away. You can't keep that money in your possession if your goal is to get right with the Lord, right? In other words, if your goal is to make an atonement, you haven't made the atonement under these facts until you give away that money. Even though the restitution has now been converted into a loan, and technically you wouldn't have to pay, you would have got off from paying the loan once the convert died and didn't leave any heirs, since the original facts were that you stole and needed to make restitution plus the fifth. Now you need to get that money out of your possession. You need to give it away. And that is the law. Rabbi Yochanan explains these respective opinions. According to the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, there is no difference if the one to whom payment is due forgives the return of a stolen item to himself, such as in this case of a convert who died, or in the case of the Mishna where a son robbed his father who then died. And there is no difference if he forgives the return of a stolen item to others. In either case, he can forgive payment. And according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, there is no difference if the one to whom payment is due forgives the return of a stolen item to others, and there is no difference if he forgives the return of a stolen item to himself. In either case, he cannot forgive payment. So Rabbi Yochanan continues his analysis, and according to the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, the same is true. The law would also be that no liability would remain in the case of the convert, even had he not established the robbery debt as a loan, as the robber could forgive the obligation to himself once the convert died. And the fact that the Baraisa teaches its law in a case where he established it as a loan for the robber is to convey to you the far-reaching nature of the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that even if he established it as a loan for him, in which case it could be considered as though the robber had returned the stolen item and now has a standard loan debt, Nevertheless, the robber has no remedy until he will remove his stolen item from his possession so as not to benefit from his act of robbery. And this certainly feels right, makes common sense, right? If he wanted to make an atonement, wanted to make restitution, the circumstances became very unusual and he wasn't able to give it back to the convert, had became alone, etc., and then the convert died. Okay, this is like a, 1,000 to 1 odds that all these circumstances would line up in a row. Nevertheless, he shouldn't keep that money because he stole it. He stole it. It should not be part of his possessions. Now, Rav Sheshes objects to this interpretation of the Baraisa. If so, says Rav Sheshes, then according to the opinion of Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, let the Mishnah on page 103a, which indicates that one can forgive the principal payment of a robbery, right? Because when we were discussing about the obligation of a robber who stole, swore he didn't steal, then repents and admits that he stole and that he lied about it. So he has to make restitution of what he stole. He has to add the fifth, and he has to go to wherever that person is or give it to an agent of the court. And as part of that discussion, we heard that even if the robbery victim, forgives the principal, and even if he forgives the fifth, but he forgives all of it except for one peruta. He says, well, listen, you don't owe me $100 and you don't owe me the extra $20 as the fifth, but you still owe me 1 penny, okay? So I forgive $119.99. Then he still has to go and make the apology. It's only when the guy fully forgives. But at any rate, as part of that discussion, we learn that the robbery victim can forgive. He has the right to forgive and not require that the robber make restitution, right? So that's what we learned on 103a. Now here, Rav Sheshes is saying, if so, then according to the opinion, where was I? Yeah, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, let the Mishnah on 103a, which indicates that one can forgive the principal payment of a robbery, teach us instead that the robbery victim can forgive the obligation to himself. And it would be understood that all the more so one can forgive the obligation to others. And according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, which Rabbi Yochanan explains to be the opinion stated in the Mishnah here on page 109, let it teach us that one cannot forgive the obligation to others. And it would be understood all the more so with regard to the robber that he cannot forgive the obligation to himself. So rather, Rav Sheshes said, that Mishnah and this Mishnah are both in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef HaGalili. And when Rabbi Yosef HaGalili is saying that one can forgive the return of a stolen item, he meant specifically forgiving the obligation to others. But he cannot forgive the obligation to himself. And the Gemara asks, but if that is the law, why did this one who robbed a convert, and when the convert subsequently died, why did he acquire all that is in his possession? Perhaps the convert established it as a loan for him, and henceforth it is no longer considered stolen property, but a standard loan debt. And the Gemara offers a different explanation. Rava said that Mishnah and this Mishnah are both in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. And in these kinds of laws, right, this area of the law, we follow Rabbi Akiva over Rabbi Yosef. So when Rabbi Akiva says that he cannot forgive the return of a stolen item, he meant specifically forgiving the obligation to himself, as in the case of the convert, but he can forgive the obligation to others. So the Gemara questions Rava's explanation. By inference, does it follow that Rabbi Yosef HaGalili holds that he can forgive the return of the stolen item even to himself? But if so, payment for robbery of a convert who dies without heirs, about which the Merciful One says that it requires giving payment to the priests, how can you find these circumstances if in every case where one robs a convert and the convert dies, the robber can forgive the return of the item to himself? So Rava said, with what are we dealing here? With a case where one robbed the convert and took an oath to him that he did not rob him, and then the convert died. and the robber admitted his false oath after the convert's death, such that at the time that he admitted to it, the name, meaning God, acquired the principal and the additional 1/5 payment and gave it to the priests. So once the right to the payment is transferred to the priests, the robber can no longer forgive it. By contrast, if he admitted his false oath while the convert was still alive, and then the convert dies, the convert can forgive the obligation to himself since he already took ownership of it. And since he was able to forgive it, the convert had the right to forgive it, and then he turned it into a loan, so then perhaps he wouldn't have to pay it back once the convert died and the loan didn't have to be paid back. You might have thought that, but that's not the law. New subject. Ravina raises a dilemma with regard to payment for robbery of a female convert. What is the law? So the merciful one states in the Torah, but if the man has no kinsman, Numbers 5:8, indicating that the law applies to a male convert, but not to a woman, i.e. a female convert. If she dies after being robbed, payment would not be given to the priests. Or perhaps it is the manner of the verse to employ gendered language, but the law applies in the case of a female convert as well. So Rav Aaron said to Ravina, come and hear a solution to your dilemma, as it is taught in a baraisa that the verse states in its entirety, quote, but if the man has no kinsman to whom restitution may be made for the guilt, the restitution for guilt that is made shall be the Lord's, even the priests, besides the ram of the atonement, whereby atonement shall be made for him. I have derived only that it is referring to a man. From where is it derived that this applies equally to a woman? When it states the restitution for guilt that is made, there are two instances of the phrase that is made, which are included in this verse, as the verse mentions making restitution twice. Why does it add this seemingly superfluous language? To teach you that a female convert is included in this law exactly the same as a male convert. So the baraisa continues, if so, what is the meaning when the verse states specifically man, right? Ish. So the baraisa explains, to pay a convert who is a man, you need to investigate concerning him to determine if he has a kinsman or not. But to pay a convert who is a minor, you do not need to investigate concerning him. If it is known that he has no kinsman, since as a convert he has no kin among his birth family, and as a minor he has not yet had his own children, so you know he has no kinsman. That's the Ish is not making a distinction between men and women, it's making a distinguish between adults and minors. New subject. With regard to the payment to priests in the case of one who robbed a convert who then died without heirs, the sages taught. The verse states, restitution for guilt that is made shall be the Lord's, even the priests, same verse we've been reading, teaching that Hashem, right, God, when we say Hashem, which is a word that we typically use to refer to God, but what the word Hashem actually means is the name, right? So here, this is an instance where in the Talmud, Hashem is actually written. Okay, so hold on a second. Wait a minute. Number shall be the priests. Okay, at any rate, teaching that the name, meaning God, acquired it and gave it to the priest who is in that priestly watch, right? Which priest are we going to give it to? There's a lot of priests serving in the temple. There's and many more priests who are not serving in the temple at any particular time. So do you say that it is given only to the priest who is on that priestly watch, right? Meaning, as we've learned before, that the time the temple was standing in Jerusalem, like all the Kohanim who were living in Israel and who were of the right age and who, wanted to serve in the temple, did so as a member of a priestly watch. And I believe there were 25 or 26 priestly watches, or maybe it was 24. Maybe it was 24. and they would serve for a week at a time, right, twice a year, and then all the priests would be there, I think, on probably on Passover, when there were so many offerings that needed to be brought, possibly on other festivals as well. But so when we're talking about a priestly watch, we're talking about a subgroup of the priests who happen to be serving in the temple during the week when this person is bringing his offering. So do you say that now that he had money that he needed to make restitution, it went to a convert who left no heirs, so it's going to go to the priest? Okay, which priest? Are we saying that it must be one of the priests who is serving in the temple at that time? Or if he happens to have a friend who's a Cohen, could he just give it to him? So do you say that it is given only to the priest who is on that priestly watch? Or perhaps that is not the case, and rather he may give it to any priest that he wishes. So when it says in that verse, quote, besides the ram of the atonement whereby atonement shall be made for him, this teaches that the verse speaks of giving it to the priest who is on that priestly watch. Just as the ram that the robber brings is given only to the priest on duty who sacrifices it, so too the money is also given only to the priest on duty. He can't get out of going up to Jerusalem both to bring the guilt offering and to make restitution if he can't make restitution to the one who died. So concerning this payment, the sages taught in a case where the one who robs the convert, in a case where the one who robs the convert was himself a priest, right? So the priest is the robber. From where is it derived that he shall not say, since the payment usually is removed from the robber, and given to the priests, and it is now in my possession, it should be mine. Since it has to be given to a priest, and he himself is a priest, is this going to be an escape valve for him? And there is a logical derivation to support this reasoning as it follows. If a priest has the right to acquire the payment belonging to others who stole from a convert, then with regard to payment belonging to himself, which is already in his possession, is it not all the more so that he should keep it? And Rabbi Nussin states this logical inference with different wording. And just as with regard to a matter in which a priest has no portion until it enters his possession, for example, teruma, right, the first tithe that goes to priests, which can be given to any priest, so once it enters his possession, another priest cannot remove it from his possession, so too with regard to a matter in which a priest has a portion even before it enters his possession, for example, an item stolen from a convert, in which he has a portion as one of the priests on the priestly watch, isn't it logical that another priest cannot remove it from his possession once it is already in his possession? And the Brisa continues countering that this logical inference is not correct, as we expected. No, the priest can't keep the portion that he has to give away to a priest now that he's the robber. He can't keep it. No, if you said this concerning a matter in which a priest has no portion, where the reason why, once it enters his possession, that another priest cannot remove it from his possession, is that just as he has no portion in it, so too others have no portion in it. Would you say the same concerning an item that was robbed from a convert? As there it could be said that just as the priest who robbed him has a portion in it as one of the priests on the priestly watch, so too other priests on that watch have a portion in it. So rather the law is that the item he stole is removed from his possession and is distributed to all his brethren, the other priests. No, he doesn't keep it himself. And the Gemara raises an objection, but isn't it written, and every man's hallowed things shall be his. Whatsoever any man gives to the priest, it shall be his, indicating that a priest is not required to give to the other priests the offerings that he sacrifices, right? When we're talking about, for example, a sin offering, when somebody brings a sin offering, some of it, the blood is dashed on the altar. Some of the animal goes up in smoke as a pleasing aroma to God on the altar. And some of it is eaten by the priest. Which priest? The priest who brings that offering to the altar. By the way, it's worth saying that it's in this week's Torah portion, Tetzaveh, when we're talking about last week's Torah portion was all about the materials being collected and fabricated for erecting the tabernacle in the wilderness. And this week's Torah portion talks about the vestments of the priests, the sons of Aaron, and the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. The first one was Aaron, Moses' brother. And then it talks about which sacrifices will need to be brought when the priest, the high priest, and his sons, the priests, are inaugurated as, in their holy function. And then it says that certain sacrifices will be brought, and there'll be elevation offerings, and it will be consumed on the altar. And then it says as a satisfying aroma, or a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And Rashi comments on this phrase of satisfying aroma to the Lord, that it's not the actual smell of, the ram or the ox or the goat that, was slaughtered properly and then parts of it are put on the altar and burned. It's not that God needs to smell animals burning. What is satisfying, what is pleasing to God is that he commanded his children to do something and they did it. That's what is pleasing to God, right? And so, whenever we're sort of reading the Torah portions and we're thinking about the sacrifices that were brought in the Holy Temple thousands of years ago, and it seems so remote and, maybe difficult to connect with emotionally, connect with that idea, right? That God tells us in the Torah, right? Because who wrote the Torah? Not Moses. Moses took dictation from God. God wrote the Torah, right? All the words of the Torah are from God. Right? In fact, God wrote the Torah before he created the world. We have that in a teaching elsewhere. And so the Torah is sort of like the blueprint for the whole world. And it says in the Torah, meaning God says in the Torah, that God is pleased when we perform God's will. Now, if you stop and think about that for a second, that is an incredible act of humility by God. God is infinite. For God to say that the actions of, humans on this one planet among the billions of planets, humans who are, we are much more closely related to an amoeba than we are related to the infinite. Because God is infinite. We're mortal, we're finite. And yet God has stated that we have the ability to give God pleasure, right? Because God is a parent. God cares about us. God loves us. And when we do what God asks us to do, it pleases God. And the reason we know that is because God said so, right? So it's an incredibly beautiful statement that God made for our benefit, right? And God created this system for our benefit. He has empowered us to give him pleasure. That's an unbelievable thing when you think about it. Okay. At any rate, where am I? Right. So the priest acquires. Right. So, but isn't it written, every man's hallowed thing shall be his. Whatsoever any man gives to the priest, it shall be his. Numbers 5:10, indicating that a priest is not required to give to the other priests the offerings that he sacrifices. They're his. Therefore, just as he has the right to the flesh of the guilt offering that he brings to atone for robbing the convert, shouldn't he also have the right to the payment? And the Gemara answers, with what are we dealing in this case? We're dealing with a ritually impure priest who is unfit to sacrifice the guilt offering, and therefore he does not have rights to the flesh of the offering. And in this case, he will not be able to keep the payment for himself either. And the Gemara asks if the Baraisa states its ruling specifically with regard to an impure priest, right? A priest who is ritually impure, tameh, cannot serve in the temple, can't even enter the temple. An impure person cannot enter the temple. So with regard to an impure priest, if the Baraisa was talking about the case of an impure priest, then how can it describe the payment as a matter in which the priest has a portion? Does he have a portion in it? Therefore, the Baraisa must not be referring to an impure priest, because he can't even be in the temple to receive neither the offerings nor the temple or nor the payment, because he's not part of the priestly watch if he's impure. So this law is derived through a verbal analogy between the phrase even the priests, lakohen, Numbers 5:8, written in this context, and the phrase to the priest, lakohen, in Leviticus 27:21, from the verse stated concerning an ancestral field, which, if consecrated and then redeemed by another, does not revert to its original owner in the Jubilee year, but is given to the priests, as the Baraisa will now explain. As it is taught in a Baraisa that the verse states, but the field, when it goes out in the Jubilee, shall be holy unto the Lord, as a field dedicated. The possession thereof shall be to the priest. And the Baraisa asks, what is the meaning when the verse states the term, the possession thereof? From where is it derived that with regard to a field that goes out to the priests in the Jubilee year, and one of the priests redeemed it before the Jubilee year, from where is it derived that a priest shall not say, since a field that is redeemed by another goes out to the priests in the Jubilee year, and the field that I redeemed is in my possession, so it should be mine and not be given to the priests in general? And the Baraisa continues, and there is a logical derivation to support this reasoning as follows. If I acquire the field belonging to others who consecrated it, and it was then redeemed, and with regard to a field belonging to me, which is already in my possession, is it not all the more so that I should keep it? And that Baraisa continues, countering that this logical inference is not correct. The verse states, as a field dedicated, the possession thereof shall be to the priest, indicating that a field of which the priest has possession from his ancestors is his. But this field that he redeemed is not his. How so? It is removed from his possession and is distributed to all of his brethren, the priests. And therefore, a priest who was a robber and has to make restitution, and it turns out that the robbery victim left no heirs because he was a convert, and so now the payment of restitution needs to go to the priests. And which priest? The priest of the priestly watch. And if this priest who is the robber is part of the priestly watch, he might have thought that he could keep it since he's a member of the priestly watch. But we learn from this other area of the law about redeeming a field that cannot be returned to a family. And so it goes to the priest. And if he's the one who bought it, he can't keep it. When it says go to the priest, it has to go to the priests. And if he is the robber who's making the restitution, he doesn't share even a portion among those priests. He has to give it to the other priests and get it out of his possession. And in a sense, that's a kindness to him so that he can complete his atonement. I should have mentioned, I'm almost done because now I am done. So if you've got questions or comments, hopefully you've gotten them in, but this will reload for a moment. Okay. Here we go. It looks like just one question that Nina's passing over from Joseph. Presumably robbing parents would be breaking multiple commandments. Yes. Would that result in a capital punishment? Obviously no restitution could be made. Well, if you rob your parents, you can make restitution to make an atonement for the robbery. You would also have to make further atonement for violating the fifth commandment. Hurting your parents doesn't become a capital crime just through theft, right? I think we've seen this in this tractate, that it becomes a capital crime when you not only strike your parent, but hurt them, right? So if you raise your hand and hurt them and cause damage, like a permanent damage, that would be a capital offense. Certainly if you, God forbid to even talk about it, murder a parent, well, that would have been a capital crime anyway, right? So it becomes a capital crime when you make permanent damage on a parent, even if it's not murder. So, yeah. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday at the regular time, 6 p.m.